I knew you would be coming to me tonight, Sabaoth said, rising slowly from the throne to face them. From the moment you left Coruscant, I knew you would come. That was why I set this night for the people of my city to attack my oppressors. That wasn't necessary, Luke told him, taking an involuntary step backward as the memories of those near-disastrous days on Jomark came rushing back to him. Sabaoth had tried there to subtly corrupt him to the dark side, and when he'd failed at that, he tried to kill Luke and Mara both. But he wouldn't be trying that again. Not here. Not without the Force. Of course it was necessary, Sabaoth said. You needed a distraction to gain entrance to my prison, and they, like all lesser beings, needed purpose. What better purpose could they have than the honor of dying in the service of the Jedi? Beside him, Mara muttered something. I think you have that backwards, Luke said. The Jedi were the guardians of peace, the servants of the Old Republic, not its masters, which is why they and the Old Republic failed, Jedi Skywalker, Sabaoth said, jabbing a finger toward him in emphasis. Why they failed and why they died. The Old Republic survived 1,000 generations, Mara put in. That doesn't sound like failure to me. Perhaps not, Sabaoth said with obvious disdain. You are young and do not yet see clearly. And you do, of course, Sabaoth smiled at her. Oh yes, my young apprentice, he said softly. I do indeed. As will you. Don't count on it, Mara growled. We aren't here to get you out. The Force does not rely on what you think are your goals, Sabaoth said, nor do the true masters of the Force. Whether you knew it or not, you came here at my summons. You just go ahead and believe that, Mara said, motioning to the side of her blaster. Move over there. Of course, my young apprentice. Sabaoth took 3 steps in the indicated direction. She has great strength of will, Jedi Skywalker, he added to Luke as Mara moved warily over to the throne and crouched down to examine the armorous control boards. She will be a great power in the galaxy which we shall build. No, Luke said, shaking his head. This was perhaps his last chance to bring the insane Jedi back, to save him as he had saved Vader aboard the second Death Star. You wanted any shape to build anything, Master Sabaoth. You're not well, but I can help you if you'll let me. Sabaoth's face darkened. How dare you say such things? He demanded. How dare you even think such blasphemy about the great Jedi Master Sabaoth? But that's just it, Luke said gently. You're not the Jedi Master Sabaoth. Not the original one, anyway. The proof is there in the Katana's records. Joruus Sabaoth died a long time ago during the Outbound Flight project. Yet I am here. Yes, Luke nodded. You are, but not Joruus Sabaoth. You see, you're his clone. Sabaoth's whole body went rigid. No, he said. No, that can't be. Luke shook his head. There's no other explanation. Surely that thought has occurred to you before. Sabaoth took a long, shuddering breath, and then abruptly he threw his head back and laughed. Watch him, Mara snapped, eyeing the old man warily over the throne's armrest. He pulled this same stunt on Jomark, remember? It's all right, Luke said. He can't hurt us. Ah, Skywalker, Skywalker, Sabaoth said, shaking his head. You too? Grand Admiral Thrawn, the New Republic, and now you? What is this sudden fascination with clones and cloning? He barked another laugh and then, without warning, turned deadly serious. He does not understand, Jedi Skywalker, he said earnestly. Not Grand Admiral Thrawn, not any of them. The true power of the Jedi is not in these simple tricks of matter and energy. The true might of the Jedi is that we alone are, of all those in the galaxy, have the power to grow beyond ourselves, to extend ourselves into all the reaches of the universe. Luke glanced at Mara, got a shrug and puzzled look in return. We don't understand either, he told Sabaoth. What do you mean? Sabaoth took a step toward him. I have done it, Jedi Skywalker, he whispered, his eyes glittering in the dim light. With General Covell, what even the Emperor never did. I took his mind in my hands and altered it, reformed it and rebuilt it into my own image. Luke felt a cold shiver run through him. What do you mean, rebuilt it? Sabaoth nodded, a secret sort of smile playing around his lips. Yes, rebuilt it. And that was only the start. Beneath us, down in the depths of the mountain, the future army of the Jedi even now stands in readiness to serve us. What I did with General Covell I will do again, and again and again. Because what Grand Admiral Thrawn has never realized is that the army he thinks he is creating for himself, he is instead creating for me. And suddenly Luke understood. The clones growing down in that cavern weren't just physically identical to their original template. Their minds were identical too, or close enough to be only minor variations of the same pattern. If Sabaoth could learn how to break the mind of any one of them, he could do the same to all the clones in that group. Luke looked at Mara again. She understood too. You still think he can be saved? She demanded grimly. I need no one to save me, Mara Jade, Sabaoth told her, Tell me, do you really believe I would simply stand by and allow Grand Admiral Thrawn to imprison me this way? I didn't think he'd asked your permission, Mara bid out, stepping away from the throne. There's nothing here for us, Skywalker. Let's get out of here. I did not grant you permission to leave, Sabaoth said, his voice suddenly loud and regal. He raised his hand and Luke saw that he was holding a small cylinder. And you shall not. Mara gestured with her blaster. You're not going to stop us with that, she said with thinly veiled contempt. A remote activator has to have something to activate, and so it does, Sabaoth said, smiling thinly. I had my soldiers prepare it for me, before I sent them outside the mountain with the weapons and orders for my people. Sure. Mara took a step back toward the stairs, throwing a wary glance at the ceiling above her as her left hand found the guardrail that separated the raised section of the throne room from the lower level. We'll take your word for it. Sabaoth shook his head. You won't have to, he said softly, pressing the switch. In the back of Luke's mind, something distant and very alien seemed to shriek in agony. And suddenly, impossibly, he felt a surge of awareness and strength fill him, as if he were waking from a deep sleep or stepping from a dark room into the light. The Force was again with him. Mara! He snapped, but it was too late. Mara's blaster had already wrenched itself from her grip and been flung back across the room, and even as Luke leaped toward her, Sabaoth's outstretched hand erupted into a brilliant blaze of blue-white lightning. The blast caught Mara square in the chest, throwing her backward to slam into the guardrail behind her. Stop it! Luke shouted, getting in front of her and igniting his lightsaber. Sabaoth ignored him, firing a second burst. Luke caught most of it on his lightsaber blade, grimacing as the part he missed jolted through his muscles. Sabaoth fired a third burst, and a fourth, and a fifth, and then abruptly he lowered his hands. You will not presume to give me commands, Jedi Skywalker, he said, his voice strangely petulant. I am the master, you are the servant. I'm not your servant, Luke told him, stepping back and throwing a quick look at Mara. She was still pretty much on her feet, clutching the guardrail for support. Her eyes were open but not fully aware, her breath making little moaning sounds as she exhaled between clenched teeth. Laying his free hand on her shoulder, wincing at the stink of ozone, Luke began a quick probe of her injuries. You are indeed my servant, Sabaoth said, the earlier petulance replaced now by a sort of haughty grandeur. As is she. Leave her alone, Jedi Skywalker. She required a lesson, and she has now learned it. Luke didn't answer. None of her burns seemed too bad, but her muscles were still twitching uncontrollably. Reaching out with the Force, he tried to draw away some of the pain. I said leave her alone, Sabaoth repeated, his voice echoing eerily across the throne room. Her life is not in danger. Save your strength, rather, for the trial that awaits you. Dramatically, he lifted a hand and pointed. Luke turned to look. There, silhouetted against the shimmering galaxy hollow, stood a figure dressed in what looked like the same brown robe Sabaoth was wearing. A figure that seemed somehow familiar. There is no choice, my young Jedi, Sabaoth said, his voice almost gentle now. Don't you understand? You must serve me, or we will not be able to save the galaxy from itself. You must therefore face death and emerge at my side, or you must die that another may take your place. He lifted his eyes to the figure and beckoned. Come, he called, and face your destiny. The figure moved forward toward the stairs, unhooking a lightsaber from his belt as he came. With the blaze of light from the hologram behind him, the figure's face was still impossible to make out. Luke stepped away from Mara, a strange and unpleasant buzzing pressure beginning to form against his mind. There was something disturbingly familiar about this confrontation, as if he were about to face someone or something he'd faced once before. Abruptly, the memory clicked. Dagobah, his Jedi training, the dark side cave Yoda had sent him into, his brief dreamlike battle with a vision of Darth Vader. Luke caught his breath, a horrible suspicion squeezing his heart. But no, the silent figure approaching him wasn't tall enough to be Vader. But then who? When the figure stepped into the light, and too late, Luke remembered how that dream battle in the dark side cave had ended. Vader's mask had shattered, and the face behind it had been Luke's own, as was the face that gazed emotionlessly up at him now. Luke felt himself moving back from the steps, his mind frozen with shock and the buzzing pressure growing against it. Yes, Jedi Skywalker, Sabaoth said quietly from behind him. He is you, Luke Skywalker, created from the hand you left behind in the Cloud City on Bespin, wielding a lightsaber you lost there. Luke glanced at the weapon in the clone's hands. It was his all right. The lightsaber Obi-Wan had told him his father had left for him. Why? He managed. To bring you to true understanding, Sabaoth said gravely, and because your destiny must be fulfilled. One way or another, you must serve me. Luke threw a quick glance at him. Sabaoth was watching him, his eyes glowing with anticipation, and with madness, and in that moment the cloned Luke struck. He leaped to the top of the stairway, igniting his lightsaber and slashing the blue-white blade viciously toward Luke's chest. Luke jumped to the side, whipping his own weapon up to block the attack. The blades came together with an impact that threw him off balance and nearly tore the lightsaber from his grip. The cloned Luke jumped after him, lightsaber already swinging to the attack, reaching out to the Force. Luke threw himself backwards, flipping over the guardrail and onto one of the raised guard platforms rising from the lower part of the throne room floor. He needed time to think and plan, and to find a way past the distraction of the buzzing in his mind. But the cloned Luke wasn't going to give him that time. Stepping to the guardrail, he hurled his lightsaber downward at the base of the platform Luke was standing on. It wasn't a clean hit. The blade probably sliced through only half of the base, but it was enough to throw the platform into a sudden tilt. Reaching out again to the Force, Luke did another backflip, trying to reach the overhead catwalk that spanned the throne room 5 meters behind him, but the distance was too great, or else his mind too distracted by the buzzing to properly draw on the Force. The back of his knee hit the edge of the catwalk, and instead of landing on his feet, he flipped over to slam into it on his back. "I do not wish to do this to you, Jedi Skywalker," Sabaroth's voice called out. "I do not wish it still. Join me. Let me teach you. Together we can save the galaxy from the lesser peoples who would destroy it." "No," Luke said hoarsely, grabbing a support strut and pulling himself up as he fought to catch his breath. The clone Luke had retrieved his lightsaber now and was starting down the stairs toward him. The clone. His clone. Was that what was causing the strange presence in his mind? The close presence of an exact duplicate that was itself drawing on the Force? He didn't know, any more than he knew what Sabaoth's purpose was in throwing the two of them together. Obi-Wan and Master Yoda had both warned him that killing in anger or hatred would lead toward the dark side. Would killing a clone duplicate of himself do the same thing? Or had Sabaoth meant something entirely different? Had he meant that killing his own clone would drive Luke insane? Either way, it wasn't something Luke was anxious to find out firsthand, and it occurred to him that he really didn't have to. He could drop off the far side of the catwalk, get to the turbolift he and Mara had come up on, and escape, leaving Mara here to face Sabaoth alone. He raised his eyes. Mara was still leaning against the guardrail, possibly not fully conscious, certainly in no shape to travel. Setting his teeth together, Luke pulled himself to his feet. Mara had asked him, begged him, to kill her rather than leave her in Sabaoth's hands. The least he could do was to stay with her to the end, whether it was her end or his. The explosion drifted up from the cavern below like a distant thunderclap, clearly audible and yet curiously dampened. "You hear that, Chewie?" Lando asked, leaning back to throw a cautious look over the edge of their work platform. "You suppose something down there blew up?" Chewbacca, his hands full of cables and leads as he dug in and around the support lattice of the equipment column, growled a correction. It hadn't been one large explosion, but many simultaneous small ones. Small blasting discs or something of equally low power. "You sure?" Lando asked, uneasily, peering at the cloning tanks on the balcony one level beneath where they were working. This didn't sound like any normal malfunction. He stiffened. Thin wisps of smoke could be seen now, rising lazily into the air above the nutrient pipes feeding into the tops of the cloning tanks. A lot of wisps of smoke, and they seemed to be rising in a reasonably regular pattern, as if something in each cluster of Sparty cylinders had blown up. There was the muffled clink of metal on metal behind him. Lando twisted around to find 3PO stepping gingerly from the bridge onto the work platform, his head tilted to look down into the cavern. "Is that smoke?" the droid asked, sounding like he wasn't sure he really wanted to know. "Looks like smoke to me," Lando agreed. "What are you doing here?" Resolutely the droid looked away from whatever was happening below. "R2 has found the schematics for that equipment column," he said, offering Lando a data card. "He suggests that the negative flow coupler on the main power line might be worth investigating." "We'll keep that in mind," Lando said, sliding the data card into his data pad and throwing a quick look over the platform railing as he handed the data pad to Chewbacca. He and the Wookiee weren't all that visible against the drab colours of the equipment column and the rocky cavern ceiling 2 meters above them, but 3PO would stand out like a lump of gold on a mud flat. "Now get out of here before someone spots you." "Oh," 3PO said, stiffening a little more than usual. "Yes, of course. Also, R2 has located the source of the comlink jamming in this vicinity. Captain Solo requested that if we found that—" "Right," Lando interrupted him. "Was that someone moving behind one of the banks of Sparty cylinders on the next level down? I remember. You and R2 go ahead, and take the Nograi with you." The droid seemed taken aback. "R2 and me? But, sir," and if it sounded like a spitting tauntaun, a brilliant ripple of blue flashed upward from the cloning balcony below. "Stun blast!" Lando barked, dropping flat on the work platform and feeling the heavy thud as Chewbacca landed beside him. A second stun blast rippled out, ricocheting off the column above his head as he yanked out his blaster. "3PO, get out of here!" The droid didn't need any encouragement. "Yes, sir," he called over his shoulder, already scuttling away down the bridge. Chewbacca growled a question. "Over there somewhere," Lando told him, gesturing with his blaster. "Watch it, though. They're bound to have more moving in." A third stun blast slammed uselessly into the underside of the work platform. This time Lando spotted the soldier skulking behind one of the cloning cylinders. He fired twice, dropping the Imperial to the floor and making a mess of the cloning cylinder itself. Behind him, another blue ripple sizzled by overhead, followed a split second later by the heavy bark of Chewbacca's bowcaster. Lando grinned tightly to himself. They were in trouble, but not nearly as much as they could have been. As long as they were sitting up next to all this critical equipment, the Imperials didn't dare use anything stronger than stun settings on them. But at the same time, the Imperials themselves had absolutely no cover down there on the balconies except the cloning tanks, which meant all they really could do was stay there, probably not bothering their targets any, and get themselves in a lot of valuable equipment blown to bits. Or else they could simply come one level up and blast away at them from an angle where the heavy metal of the work platform wouldn't keep getting in their way. From the other side of the equipment column, Chewbacca rumbled. The Imperials were pulling back. Probably coming up here, Lando agreed, glancing around their level at the doors lining the outer walkway. They looked pretty strong, probably only a step or two down from warship-type blast doors. If Zahn and the Noghri had done a good job of sealing them off, they ought to hold off even a determined group of stormtroopers for a while. Except for the door to the pump room that R2 had been working in, Zahn would have left that one open for them to get out through. Lando grimaced, but there was nothing for it. Bracing his gun hand against the bottom section of the railing, he took careful aim at the door's control box and fired. The box cover flashed and crumpled, and for a couple of seconds he could see a faint sputtering of sparks through the smoke. And that was that. The Imperials were locked out, and he and Chewbacca were locked in. Keeping low, he crept around to the other side of the column. Chewbacca was already back at work, his grease-slicked hands digging back through the cables and pipes, the data pad on the floor by his feet. "Making any progress?" Lando asked. Chewbacca growled, tapping at the data pad awkwardly with one foot, and Lando craned his neck to look. It was a schematic of a section of the power cable, showing a coupling of 8 leads coming off it. Just above the coupling, clearly marked a positive flow regulator. "Aha," Lando said, a not entirely pleasant sensation running through him. "You're not by any chance thinking of running that into the negative flow coupler 3PO mentioned, are you?" In answer, the Wookiee withdrew his hand from the tangle of cables, pulling the partially disconnected negative flow coupler with it. "Wait a minute," Lando said, eyeing the coupler warily. He heard stories about what happened when you ran a negative flow coupler into a positive flow detonator, and using a positive flow regulator instead of a detonator didn't sound a lot safer. "What exactly is this supposed to do?" The Wookiee told him. He'd been right. Using a regulator wasn't any safer. In fact, it was a whole lot more dangerous. "Let's not go overboard on this, Chewie," he warned. "We came here to destroy the cloning cylinders, not bring the whole storehouse down on top of us." Chewbacca rumbled insistently. "All right, fine, we'll keep it in reserve." Lando sighed. The Wookiee grunted agreement and got back to work. Grimacing, Lando laid his blaster down and pulled 2 charges out of their explosives bag. He might as well keep himself busy while he tried to figure out how they were going to get out through blocked blast doors in a corridor full of stormtroopers, and if they wound up falling back on Chewbacca's power core arrhythmic resonance scheme, well, in that case, getting out of here would probably become an academic question anyway. Prying open a gap in the power cables with one hand, he got to work. The timing computer buzzed its 5-second warning, and Wedge took a deep breath. This was it. He reached for the hyperspace levers, and abruptly the mottled sky of hyperspace faded into starlines and into stars. Around him, the rest of Rogue Squadron flashed into view, still in formation. Ahead, the distinctive light patterns and layout of a shipyard could be seen. It arrived at the Bilbringi shipyards, only if it arrived too far out, which could only mean, "Battle alert!" Rogue 2 snapped. "TIE interceptors coming in! Bearing 293 Mark 20. All ships, emergency combat status," Admiral Akbar's gravelly voice cut on the comm. "Defensive configuration. Starfighter command to screen positions. It appears to be a trap." "Sure does," Wedge muttered to himself, pulling hard to port side and risking a quick look at his displays. Sure enough, they were the interdictor cruisers that had brought them out of hyperspace, staying well back from the massive fleets that were beginning to jockey for battle position. And judging from the way they'd been deployed, the New Republic fleet wasn't going to be jumping to light speed anytime soon. Even the TIE interceptors were on them, and there was no time left to wonder why their carefully planned surprise attack had failed before it had even begun. For the moment, the only question was that of survival, one ship and one engagement at a time. The stealthy footsteps came around the corner 10 meters away and continued toward him, and Zahn, pressed painfully back into the slightly recessed doorway that was the only cover for those same 10 meters, abandoned the faint hope that his pursuers would miss him and prepared for the inevitable firefight. They should have turned off. In fact, by all rights, they shouldn't have been up here at all. From the snatches of status reports he'd been able to catch while passing by deserted checkpoints, it sounded like everyone who could carry a blaster was supposed to be 20 levels down fighting the natives who were running loose through the garrison. These upper levels didn't seem to even be occupied, and there sure wasn't anything up here except maybe Sabaoth that needed any protection. The footsteps were getting closer. It would be just his luck, Zahn thought sourly, to run into a couple of deserters looking for a place to hide. And then, maybe 5 meters away, the footsteps abruptly stopped, and in the sudden silence he heard a stifled gasp. He'd been spotted. Han didn't hesitate. Pushing hard off the door behind him, he leaped across the corridor, trying to duplicate that trick down at the defense station, or at least do the best he could without Chewbacca here to back him up. There were fewer of them out there than he'd expected, and further to the side than he expected, and he lost a vital half-second as this blaster tracked toward them. "Han!" Leia shouted. "Don't shoot!" The sheer surprise of it caught Han's timing straight across the knees, and he slammed rather ingloriously into the wall on the opposite side of the corridor. It was Leia, all right. Even more surprising, Talon Card was with her, along with those two Vaughnsker pets of his. "What in blazes are you doing here?" he demanded. "Luke's in trouble," Leia said breathlessly, rushing forward and giving him a quick, tense hug. "He's ahead somewhere. Whoa, sweetheart," Han assured her, hanging onto her arm as she tried to pull away. "It's okay. We know the Asalamiri were here going in." Leia shook her head. "That's just it. They're not. The Force is back, just before you jumped out of cover." Han swung to his breath. "Sabaoth," he muttered. "Has to be him." "Yes," Leia said, shivering. "It is." Han threw a look at Card. "I was hired to destroy the Emperor's storehouse," the smuggler said evenly. "I brought Sturm and Drang along to help us find Mara." Han glanced at the Vaughnskers. "You have anyone else with you?" he asked Leia. She shook her head. "We ran into a squad of troops 3 levels down, moving this way. Our 2 Nograi stayed behind to hold them off." He looked at Card. "How about your people?" "They're all on the wild card," he said, "guarding our exit, should we have the chance to use it." Han grunted. "And then I guess it's just us," he said, shifting his grip on Leia's arm and heading down the corridor. "Come on, they're up in the throne room. I know the way." And as they ran, he tried not to think about the last time he'd faced a Dark Jedi, in Lando's Cloud City on Bespin, when Vader had tortured him and then had him frozen in carbonite. Somehow, from what Luke had told him, he didn't expect Sabaoth to be even that civilized. The lightsabers flashed, blue-white blade against green-white blade, sizzling where they struck each other, slashing through metal and cable where they hit anything else. Gripping the guardrail with both hands, fighting against the turmoil roiling through her own mind, Mara watched in helpless fascination as the battle raged across the throne room floor. It was like a twisted inversion of that last horrifying vision the Emperor had given her at the instant of his destruction nearly 6 years ago, except that this time it wasn't the Emperor who was facing death, it was Skywalker, and it was no vision, it was real. "Watch them closely, Mara Jade," Sabaoth said from where he stood at the top of the steps, his voice hard yet strangely wistful. "Unless you bow willingly to my authority, you will someday face this same battle." Mara threw a sideways look at him. Sabaoth was watching this duel he'd orchestrated with a fascination that bordered on the grisly. She'd called it all right, back when she'd first met him on Jomark. The work he'd done for Thrawn had given him a taste of power, and like the Emperor before him, that taste had not been enough. But unlike the Emperor, he was not going to be content merely with the control of worlds and armies. His would be a more personal form of empire, minds reformed and rebuilt into his own conception of what a mind should be. Which meant that Mara had been right on the other count too. Sabaoth was thoroughly insane. "It is not insanity to offer the richness of my glory to others," Sabaoth murmured. "It is a gift which many would die for." "You're giving Skywalker a good shot at that part anyway," Mara bit out, shaking her head to try and clear it. Between her own memories, an echo of the strange buzzing pressure she was picking up from Skywalker's mind, and Sabaoth's overbearing presence 2 meters away, trying to hang on to a line of thought was like trying to fly an airspeeder in a winter windstorm. But there was a mental pattern the Emperor had taught her long ago, a pattern for those times when he'd wanted his instructions hidden even from Vader. If she could clear her mind enough to get it in place... Through the turmoil came a sudden jolt of pain. "Do not attempt to hide your thoughts from me, Mara Jade," Sabaoth admonished her sharply. "You are mine now. It is not right for an apprentice to hide her thoughts from her master." "So I'm already your apprentice, huh?" Mara growled, gritting her teeth against the pain and making another try at the pattern. This time she made it. "I thought I had at least until I'd knelt at your feet." "You mock my vision," Sabaoth said, his voice darkly petulant. "But you shall kneel before me, just like Skywalker will, right? Assuming he lives through this?" "He will be mine," Sabaoth agreed, quietly confident, "as will his sister and her children. And then together you'll heal the galaxy," Mara said, watching his face and listening to the turmoil in her mind. Yes, the barrier seemed to be keeping Sabaoth back. Now if she could just hold on to that privacy a little longer. "You disappoint me, Mara Jade," Sabaoth said, shaking his head. "Do you truly believe I need to hear your thoughts in order to read your heart? Like the lesser peoples of the galaxy, you seek my destruction. A foolish notion. Did the Emperor teach you nothing about how destiny... He didn't do a good job of reading his own, I know that much," Mara retorted, listening to her heart thudding as she watched Sabaoth. That erratic mind of his decided she was a genuine threat and launched another of those lightning bolt attacks. Sabaoth smiled, holding his arms out to the sides. "Do you feel the need to measure your strength against mine, Mara Jade? Come, then, and do so." For a pair of heartbeats she eyed him, almost tempted to try. He looked so old and helpless, and she had her mental barrier and some of the best unarmed combat training the Empire at its height could provide. It would take just a few seconds. She took a deep breath and lowered her eyes. No, not now, not like this, not with these pressures and distractions spinning through her mind. She'd never make it. You kill me now and I won't be able to kneel for you, she muttered, letting her shoulders slump in an attitude of defeat. Very good, Sabaoth purred. You have wisdom of a sort, after all. Watch, then, and learn. Mara turned back to the guardrail, but not to watch the lightsaber duel. Somewhere down there was the blaster Sabaoth had torn from her grip when he did whatever it was he'd done to the mountains of Salamiri and got into the Force again. She could find it before Sabaoth realized that she hadn't really given up. Across the floor, Skywalker leaped up again to the catwalk. The clone was ready for the move, hurling his lightsaber upward right behind him. The blue-white blade missed Skywalker by a hair, slicing instead most of the way through the catwalk floor and one of the support struts holding it to the ceiling. With a tooth-jarring shriek, the strained metal twisted under Skywalker's weight, dumping him back off. He hit the floor more or less on his feet, dropping down to land on one knee. His hand reached out, and the lightsaber that had been falling toward the clone suddenly changed direction. It arced toward Skywalker's hand and stopped dead in midair. Skywalker strained, the muscles of his hand tightening visibly as his mind stretched out. Not that way, Jedi Skywalker, Sabaoth said reprovingly, and Mara glanced over to see that his hand too was stretched out toward the errant lightsaber. The clone, for his part, was just standing there in his brown robe, as if he knew that Sabaoth would be on his side in this battle. Maybe he did. Maybe there was nothing left in that body but an extension of Sabaoth's own mind. This duel must be to the death, Sabaoth continued. It must be weapon against weapon, mind against mind, soul against soul. Anything less will not bring you to the knowledge you must have if you are to properly serve me. Skywalker was good all right. With the strange buzzing pressure in his mind, he must have known he couldn't match Sabaoth strength for strength. Mara felt the subtle change in his concentration, and suddenly he swung his own lightsaber over his shoulder, the green-white blade skyfing toward a point midway along the other lightsaber handle. But if Sabaoth wouldn't let Skywalker disarm his opponent, he wouldn't let him destroy the weapon either. Even as the blade sliced downward, a small object shot out of the shadows to Skywalker's right, slamming into his shoulder and deflecting his arm just far enough for his blade to sweep through empty air. An instant later, the old Jedi had torn the clone's lightsaber from Skywalker's mental grip, setting it back across the room to its owner. The clone raised it to on-guard position. Wearily, Skywalker got to his feet and prepared to continue the battle. But for the moment, Mara wasn't interested in the lightsabers. Lying on the floor maybe 2 meters back from Skywalker's feet was the object Sabaoth had thrown at him, Mara's blaster. She looked sideways at Sabaoth, wondering if he was watching her. He wasn't. In fact, he wasn't looking at much of anything. His eyes were unfocused, staring across the throne room, a strangely childlike smile on his face. She has come, he said, his voice almost inaudible over the clash of the lightsabers below, just as I knew she would. Abruptly, he looked at Mara. She is here, Mara Jade, he said, pointing dramatically toward the turbolift she and Skywalker had come up. Frowning, not sure she could take her eyes off him, Mara turned her head to look. The turbolift door slid open and Solo stepped out, his blaster ready, and right behind him, Mara caught her breath, her whole body going tense. It was Leia Organa Solo, holding the blaster in one hand and her lightsaber in the other, and behind her, his pet Vaughn skiers in front of him on leashes. It was Card. Organa Solo and Card. Leia, Han, go back! Skywalker called to them over the clash of the lightsabers as the newcomers moved along the walkway past the galaxy hologram and on into the main part of the throne room. It's too dangerous. Welcome, my new apprentice, Sabaoth shouted joyfully, his voice drowning out Skywalker's as it echoed grandly in the open space. Come to me, Leia Organa Solo. I will teach you the true ways of the Force. Solo had a different sort of lesson in mind. He reached the end of the walkway, sighted along the barrel of his blaster, and fired. But even wallowing in self-delusion, a Jedi of Sabaoth's power couldn't be taken out that easily. In a blur of motion, Mara's blaster leaped upward from the floor into the path of the shot, its grip shattering into a shower of sparks as Solo's light expended its energy there. The second shot was likewise blocked. The third caught in the blaster's power pack, turning the weapon into a spectacular fireball. The blaster was torn from Solo's grip before he could fire a fourth, and Sabaoth went berserk. He screamed, a horrible shriek of rage and betrayal that seemed like it would set the air on fire. Mara jerked back as the piercing sound cut through her ears, and an instant later nearly fell over the guardrail as the Force equivalent of the scream slammed into her. It was like nothing she'd ever experienced before, not from Vader, not from the Emperor himself. The utter animal ferocity, the total loss of every shred of self-control. It was like standing alone in the middle of a sudden violent storm. Wave after wave of fury swept over her, ripping through the mental barrier she'd created and battering her mind with a numbing, combination of hatred and pain. Dimly, she saw Skywalker and Organa Solo staggering under the assault, heard Card's Vornskirs howling in pain of their own, and from C'baoth's outstretched hands erupted a blaze of lightning. Mara winced in sympathetic pain as Solo was thrown backwards into the guardrail at the front of the hologram pit. Through the crackle of the lightning, she heard Organa Solo shout her husband's name and jump to his side, dropping her blaster and igniting her lightsaber just in time to catch the third blast of lightning on the green-white blade. Abruptly, C'baoth shifted his aim upward to the damaged catwalk hanging precariously over their heads. The lightning flashed again, and with a crack of exploding metal, the center of the catwalk split apart. Pivoting on its last remaining support strut, it toppled ponderously downward toward Organa Solo. She saw it coming, or maybe Skywalker's training had taught her how to use the Force to anticipate danger. As the heavy metal swung down on her, she slashed upward with her lightsaber, cutting through the catwalk far enough to the side, for the main part missed her and Solo as it swung past to crash into the floor in front of Card and the Vornskirs. There was no time for her to get out from under the end she had cut off. It caught her across her head and shoulder, knocking the lightsaber from her hand and hammering her to the floor beside Solo. "Leia!" Skywalker shouted, throwing an anguished glance at his sister. Suddenly, the debilitating buzzing in his mind seemed to be forgotten as his fighting abruptly shifted from groggy defense to furious attack. The clone fell back before the onslaught, barely managing to block Skywalker's blows. He jumped up onto the stairway, hastily backed 2 steps further up towards the bow, as Skywalker charged after him, then leaped over onto the remaining guard platform. For a second, Mara thought Skywalker was going to pursue him up there, or else cut through the platform base and bring him down. He didn't do either. Standing halfway up the stairs, a sheen of sweat glistening on his face, he gazed up at C'baoth with an expression that sent a shiver down Mara's back. "Do you also seek to destroy me, Jedi Skywalker?" C'baoth said, his voice quietly deadly. "For such thoughts are foolish. I could crush you like a small insect beneath my heel, perhaps," Skywalker said, breathing heavily, "but if you do, you'll never have the chance to control my mind." C'baoth studied him. "What do you want?" Skywalker jerked his head back toward his sister and Solo. "Let them leave. All of them. Now." His eyes flicked to Mara. "Mara too. And if I do?" A muscle in Skywalker's cheeks twitched. His finger moved, and with a sputtering hiss, his lightsaber blade disappeared. "Let them go," he said quietly, "and I'll stay." From somewhere nearby, a dull thudding noise began, adding a regular pulse beat to the eerie breathing sounds whispering through the cloning cavern. A blaster rifle pounding against heavy metal, Lando decided, giving the doors around the walkway a quick look. So far, they all seemed secure, but he knew that wouldn't last. The stormtroopers out there weren't firing at the doors just for target practice, and there was bound to be a bag of shaped explosives on their way. From the other side of the equipment column, Chewbacca rumbled a warning. "I am keeping my head down," Lando assured him, peering into the gap between 2 large ducts at the maze of multicolored wiring and piping beyond. Now where was that repulsor pump connection again? He had located the spot and was reaching in with the charge when the call beep from his comlink unexpectedly went off, echoed a fraction of a second later from Chewbacca's comlink. Frowning, half expecting it to be some hotshot Imperial tech who'd found his channel, he pulled it out. "Calrissian," he said. "Ah, General Calrissian," 3PO's precise voice came back. "I see Arto has been successful in eliminating the jamming. Surprising, actually, given all the trouble which you've been required to tell him good job." Lando cut him off. Now was decidedly not the time for a pleasant little chat with 3PO. "Was there anything else?" "Ah, yes, sir, there is," the droid said. "The Noghai instructed me to ask whether you wish us to return to assist you." There was another thud, a louder one this time. "I wish you could," Lando sighed, "but you'd never make it back in time." The thud came again, and this time he distinctly saw the door opposite their bridge shake with the impact. "We'll just have to get out of here by ourselves." From the other side of the work platform, Chewbacca rumbled his less enthusiastic opinion of that. "But if Chewbacca wishes us to return, you won't get here in time," Lando told him firmly. "Tell the Noghai if they want to be useful, they should head up to the throne room and give Han a hand. It's too late for that," a new voice put in, almost too quiet to hear. Lando frowned at the comlink. "Han? No, it's Talon Card," the other identified himself. "I came in with Councilor Organa Solo. We're up in the throne room." "Leia's here?" Lando asked. "What in—" "Shut up and listen." Card cut him off. "That Jedi Master of Luke's, Jorah C'baoth, is up here too. He's taken out Solo and Organa Solo both, and a Skywalker fighting what looks to be a clone of himself. He's not paying any attention to me at the moment. There's some kind of face-off going on up there, but he would the minute I tried anything." "I thought Luke said the force was being blocked." "It was. Somehow C'baoth got it back." "Are you down with the cloning tanks?" "We're above them, yes." "Why? Organa Solo suggested earlier that there should be a large number of Ysalamiri scattered around that area," Card said. "If you can pull a few of them off their nutrient frames and get them up here, you might have a chance of stopping him." Chewbacca growled mournfully, and Lando felt his lip twist as he nodded agreement. So that was what all those blasting disc explosions had been about. Too late for that too, he told Card. Spaff's already had them all killed. For a long moment the comlink was silent. I see, Card said at last. Well, that explains that. Any suggestions? Lando hesitated. Not really, he said. If we come up with anything, we'll let you know. Thank you, Card said, a little too dryly. I'll be waiting. There was a click as he left the channel. 3PO, you still there? Lando asked. Yes, sir, Droid answered. Get R2 back on the computer, Lando told him. Have him do whatever he can to shift troops away from the air intake we came in through. Then you and the Nograi start heading that way. We're leaving, sir? 3PO asked, sounding astonished. That's right, Lando told him. And Chewie and I will be right behind you, so you better move fast if you don't want to get stepped on. Better we'll have the 2 Nograi that Luke sent with that Minarishi bunch, too. Got all that? Yes, sir, 3PO said hesitantly. What about Master Luke and the others? Leave that to me, Lando told him. Get busy. Yes, sir, 3PO said again. Another click and he was gone. There was a moment of silence. Chewbacca broke it with the obvious question. I don't think we've got a choice anymore, Lando told him grimly. The way Luke and Mara talk about him, Spaff's at least as dangerous as the Emperor was. Maybe even more so. We've got to try to take out the whole storehouse and hope we get him along with it. Chewbacca growled an objection. We can't, Lando shook his head. At least not until it's set and running. We want anyone up there now and Spaff will know all about it. Might have time to get it stopped. There was another muffled blast from the door. Come on, let's get this done, Lando said, picking up the last of his explosives. With luck they would have time to rig Chewbacca's arrhythmic resonance gimmick before the stormtroopers got in. With a little more luck, the 2 of them might make it out of the cavern alive. And with still more, they might be able to find a way to alert Han and the others before the whole storehouse blew up beneath them. For a long moment the throne room was silent. Mara stared at Skywalker, wondering if he understood what he was saying, to offer to voluntarily stay here with C'baoth. His gaze flicked sideways again to meet hers, and even through the buzzing in his mind she could feel his private dread. He knew what he was saying all right, and he meant it. If C'baoth accepted his offer, he would go willingly with the insane Jedi, sacrificing himself to save his friends, including the woman who'd once promised to kill him. She turned away, suddenly unable to watch. Her eyes found Card, half hidden behind the wreckage of the catwalk as he knelt between these 2 Vaughnskiers, stroking them, talking quietly to them, probably calming them down after that force-driven tantrum of C'baoth's. She peered at the animals, but they didn't seem to be hurt. Her head movement must have caught Card's eye. He looked up at her, his face expressionless. Still patting the Vaughnskiers, he tilted his head fractionally towards Solo and Organa Solo. Frowning, Mara followed his gaze, and froze. Beside the section of catwalk wreckage still half covering his wife, Solo was moving. Slowly, a couple of centimeters at a time, he was creeping across the floor, toward the blast Organa Solo had dropped. You ask too much, Skywalker, C'baoth warned softly. Mara Jade will be mine. Must be mine. It is the destiny demanded of her by the Force. Not even you may trifle with that. Right, Mara put in, looking back at C'baoth and putting all the sarcasm into her voice as she could manage. Whatever the risks to herself, she had to draw as much of C'baoth's attention away from the other end of the throne room as she could. Layla still left to kneel at his feet, remember? You insult me, Mara Jade, C'baoth said, turning an evil smile on her. Do you really believe me so easy to mislead? Still watching her, he crooked a finger, and as Solo's hand stretched out toward it, the blaster twitched another half-meter out of his reach. From the guard platform came a subtle change in hum. Skywalker, look out! Mara snapped. Skywalker spun around, lightsaber igniting again and swinging up into defense. The clone, his wind or his courage back, was already halfway through his leap, his lightsaber slicing downward. The 2 blades met with a crash and an impact that drove Skywalker backward to the edge of the stairway. He took 1 step more, fought for balance, then dropped off to the floor below. Mara threw a quick look at Solo as the clone charged over the edge in pursuit. The clone really was an extension of C'baoth's mind. But no. Even as Solo tried again for the blaster, it again slid away from him. Whatever effort C'baoth was expending on the lightsaber duel, he clearly still had enough concentration left to toy with his prisoners. You see, Mara Jade? C'baoth asked quietly. His fury had passed. The brief flicker of fun as he toyed with his prisoners had passed. Now it was time to return to the important business of building his empire. It is inevitable. I will rule, and along with Skywalker and his sister, you will serve at my side, and we shall be great together. Abruptly, he took a long step back from the guardrail on the other side of the stairway. Just in time, an instant later, Skywalker was backflipping up from the lower throne room floor. He landed with his back to Mara, floundering a moment as he fought to recover his balance. There was another flash of light, blue-white this time, as the clone leaped up over the guardrail in pursuit, swinging his lightsaber in vicious horizontal arcs to guard against attack. Skywalker moved backward out of his way. Glancing past him, Mara saw Sabaoth take a hasty backward step of his own. The clone hit the floor and charged, lightsaber still slashing towards Skywalker in right horizontal arcs. Skywalker continued to give way, apparently unaware that he was backing toward the solid rock wall, against which he would be trapped. They passed by, and Mara looked over to find Sabaoth once again gazing at her. "As I said, Mara Jade," he said, "inevitable, and if you and Skywalker beside me, the lesser peoples of the galaxy will flock to us like leaves in the wind. Their hearts and their souls would be ours." He looked across the room and beckoned. Still crouching behind the catwalk wreckage, Card jerked in surprise as his blaster rose from his holster and shot through the air towards Sabaoth. Halfway there it was joined by Organa Solo's dropped lightsaber, and the blaster Solo was still doggedly trying to chase down, as were their insignificant weapons. Sabaoth added, holding an exultant hand out to receive them. He turned his eyes back to the duel about to play itself to its conclusion. It was the chance Mara had been waiting for, possibly the last chance she would ever have. Reaching through the chaos surrounding her mind, she stretched out to the Force, focusing her eyes and mind on the weapons flying across the room towards Sabaoth's hand. She felt his inattentive control snap, and Organa Solo's lightsaber arced away from the blasters to land firmly in her hand. Sabaoth spun back to face her, the blasters falling with a clatter onto the stairway. "No!" he screamed, his face twisted horribly with fear, confusion, and dread. Mara felt his sudden frantic tug, fumbling at the lightsaber, but it too was twisted with confusion and dread, and this time he didn't have surprise on his side. Given time, he would recover from the shock. But Mara had no intention of giving him that time. Igniting the lightsaber, she charged. The clone must have heard her coming, of course. The distinctive sound of her lightsaber made that inevitable. Over Skywalker backed up against the wall, the temptation to finish off one opponent first was too great to resist. He swung one last time, his lightsaber slashing into the wall as Skywalker ducked low beneath the blade, and with a brilliant flash of shattered electronics, the wall exploded outward over Skywalker's head and directly into the clone's face. Skywalker hadn't been backing into a wall after all. He'd been backing into one of the throne room's view screens. The clone shrieked, the first sound Mara could remember hearing him make, as he staggered backward. He spun toward the sound of her lightsaber, his face twisted with anger and fear, his eyes still dazzled. He raised his lightsaber to attack. "You will kill Luke Skywalker." She ducked beneath the slashing blade, gazing into his face, Skywalker's face, the face that had haunted her nightmares for nearly 6 years, the face the Emperor had ordered her to destroy. "You will kill Luke Skywalker." And for the first time since she had found Skywalker and his crippled X-Wing floating in deep space, she let herself give in to the voice swirling through her mind. For all her strength, she swung her lightsaber and cut him down. The clone crumpled, his lightsaber clattering to the floor beside him. Mara gazed down at him, and as she took a ragged breath, the voice in the back of her mind fell silent. It was done. She had fulfilled the Emperor's last command, and she was finally free. "That appears to be all of them, Captain," Thrawn said, gazing out the bridge viewport at the rebel warships spread out along the edges of the interdictor cruiser's gravity cones. "Instruct the Constrainer and Sentinel to secure from entrapment duty and return to their positions in the demarcation line. All warships, prepare to engage the enemy." "Yes, sir," Pleon said, shaking his head in silent wonder as he keyed in the orders. Once again, against overwhelming evidence to the contrary, the Grand Admiral had proved himself right. The rebel assault fleet was here, and probably wondering at this very moment what had gone wrong with their clever little scheme. "It occurs to me, Admiral, that we might not want to destroy all of them," he suggested. "Someone should be allowed to return to Coruscant to tell them how badly they were outsmarted." "I agree, Captain," Thrawn said, "though I doubt that will be their interpretation. More likely they'll conclude instead that they were betrayed." "Probably," Leon agreed, throwing a quick look around the bridge. He'd thought he'd heard a faint sound just then, something like an overstressed bearing or someone rumbling in the back of his throat. He listened closely, but the sound wasn't repeated, though that would work equally well to our advantage. "Indeed," Thrawn said. "Shall we designate Admiral Akbar's Star Cruiser for messenger duty?" Pleon smiled tightly. Akbar, who just barely survived Councillor Borsk Faliar's previous accusations of incompetence and treason over the operation of the Sluisvan shipyards. This time he wouldn't be so lucky. "A nice touch, Admiral," he said. "Thank you, Captain." Pleon glanced up at Rook, standing silent guard behind Thrawn's chair, wondered if the Nograi appreciated the irony of it all. Given the species' lack of sophistication, probably not. Ahead, space was filling with flashes of laser fire as the opposing starfighter squadrons began to engage. Settling himself comfortably in his chair, Pleon glanced over his displays and prepared his mind for battle and for victory. "Watch it, Rogue Leader, you've picked up a couple of tails," the voice of Rogue 2 came in Wedge's ear. "Rogue 6, right with you, Rogue 2, the other confirmed. "Double chop on 3. 1, 2... Bracing himself, Wedge threw his X-Wing into a wild scissors roll. The two TIE fighters, trying to match his maneuver while at the same time not overshooting him, probably never even saw the other two X-Wings drop into position behind them. Two messy explosions later, Wedge was clear. "Thanks," he said. "No problem. What now?" "I don't know," he admitted, taking a quick look at the battle raging around them. So far, Admiral Akbar was still holding his Star Cruisers together in combat formation, but the way the periphery support ships are being hammered by the Imperials, the whole thing could dissolve into the mass confusion of a brawl at any minute, in which event the starfighter squadrons would be basically on their own, hitting wherever and whatever they could, which they were for all practical purposes doing now anyway. The trick would be to find something really effective to hit. Rogue 2 must have followed the same reasoning. "You know, Rogue Leader, it occurs to me that those Imperials wouldn't have so many ships available to pound us with if they had to protect their shipyard at the same time." Wedge craned his neck to look at the blaze of lights off in the near distance. Silhouetted against them, he could make out the dark brooding outlines of at least 4 Golan 2 battle stations. "Agreed," he said, "but I think it would take more than an attack by even the legendary Rogue Squadron to make them that nervous." "Commander Antilles, this is Fleet Central Communications," a brisk voice cut in. "I have a signal-coded urgent coming in for you under a New Republic diplomatic encrypt. Do you want to bother with it?" Wedge blinked. "A diplomatic encrypt? Way out here? I suppose so. Sure, put it through." "Yes, sir." There was a click. "Hello, Antilles," a vaguely familiar voice said dryly in his ear. "Nice to see you again. The feeling's mutual, I'm sure," Wedge said, frowning. "Who is this?" "Oh, come now," the other chided. "Have you forgotten already those wonderful times you spent together outside the Mumbri Stove Cantina?" "The Mumbri Stove? Aves? Hey, very good," Aves said. "Your memory's getting better." "You people are starting to be hard to forget," Wedge told him. "Where are you?" "Right smack in the middle of that big blaze of Imperial lights off of you on your flank," Aves said, his voice turning a little grim. "I wish you'd told me you were hitting this place instead of Tangerine like we thought." "I wish you'd told me what that little job of yours is all about," Wedge countered. "Did a good job of fooling each other, didn't we?" "Sure did. Fooled everybody except the Grand Admiral. Tell me about it. So is this just a social call or what?" "It could be," Aves said, "or it couldn't. See, in about 90 seconds, some of us are going to make a grab for the CGT where we came here to get. After that, it's a quick goodbye and we punch our way out." Punching their way out from an Imperial shipyard. And he made it sound so easy, too. "Good luck." "Thanks. The reason I mention it is that it doesn't matter much to us which direction we pick to punch through. Thought it might make a difference to you." Wedge felt a tight smile tugging at his lip. "It might, at that," he said. "Like, say, if you were to come out near those Golan 2s out there, maybe hitting them a little from behind on the way." "Looks like a good route to me," Aves agreed. "Of course it'll get nasty outside the perimeter, all those ships and things taking pot shots and all. I don't suppose you could find a way to give us a friendly escort from that point on." Wedge looked over at the lights, thinking it over. It could work all right. If Aves' people were able to knock out even one of those Golan 2s, it would open up the shipyard to a New Republic incursion. Unless the Imperials are willing to sacrifice it, they would have to shift some of their battle force over there to close the puncture and chase down any ships that had gotten in. And from the smugglers' point of view, having an influx of New Republic warships to sneak through on their way out would give them better cover than they would get anywhere else along the perimeter. All in all, a pretty fair exchange. "You've got a deal," he told Aves. "Give me a couple of minutes and I'll get that escort arranged." "A friendly escort, don't forget," Aves warned. "If you know what I mean." "I know exactly what you mean," Wedge assured him. For traditional Mon Calamari loathing for smugglers and smuggling was the stuff of wardroom legend, and Wedge didn't want to get caught in the middle of that any more than Aves did. Probably why the smuggler had come to him instead of offering his assistance to Akbar and the fleet commanders directly. "Don't worry, I've got it covered." "Okay." "Whoops, there goes the first charge. See you." The comm clicked off. "We're going in?" Rogue 11 asked. "We're going in," Wedge confirmed, bringing his X-Wing around in a tight starboard turn. "Rogue 2, give Command a quick update and tell them we need some support. Don't mention Aves by name. Just tell them we're coordinating with an independent resistance group inside the shipyards." "Got it, Rogue Leader." "What if Akbar doesn't want to risk it?" Rogue 7 put in. Wedge looked out at the lights of the shipyard. So once again, as it had so many times before, it was all going to come down to a matter of trust. Trust in a farm kid, fresh off a backward desert world, to lead him in an attack on the first Death Star. Trust in a former high-stakes gambler, who might or might not have had any real combat experience, to lead him in an attack on the second Death Star. Now trust in a smuggler who might just as easily betray him for the right price. "It doesn't matter," he said. "With or without support, we're going in." Mara's lightsaber flashed, slicing viciously through the clone Luke. The clone fell, its lightsaber clattering to the floor, and lay still. And suddenly the buzzing pressure in Luke's mind was gone. He rose to his feet in front of the still-sparking view screen he'd lured the clone to, taking what felt like the first clean breath he'd had in hours. The ordeal was finally over. "Thank you," he said quietly to Mara. She took a step back from the dead clone. "No problem." "Brain all clear now?" So she'd been able to sense the buzzing in his mind. He'd wondered about that. "Yes," he nodded, taking another wonderfully clean breath. How about yours? She threw him a look that was half amused, half ironic, but for the first time since they'd met, he could see that the pain and hatred were gone from her eyes. I did what he wanted me to, she said. It's over. Luke looked back across the throne room. Card had tied the Vornskys' leashes to the collapsed catwalk and was picking his way carefully across the wreckage. Zahn, on his feet now, was still helping a still groggy Leia out from under the section that had fallen on her. Leia, Luke called. You all right? I'm fine, Leia called back. Just a little banged up. Let's get out of here, all right? Luke turned back to Sabaoth. The old Jedi was staring down at the dead clone, his hands working at his sides, his eyes furious and lost and insane. Yes, he agreed. Come on, Mara. Go ahead, Mara said. I'll be with you in a minute. Luke eyed her. What are you going to do? What do you think? She retorted. I'm going to finish the job, like I should have done on Jomark. Slowly, Sabaoth raised his eyes to her. You will die for this, Mara Jade, he said, his quiet voice more chilling than any outburst of rage could have been. Slowly and in great pain, taking a deep breath, curling his hands into fists in front of his chest, he closed his eyes. We'll see about that, Mara muttered. Raising her lightsaber, she started toward him. It began as a distant rumble, more felt than really heard. Luke looked around the room, senses tingling with a premonition of danger, but he could see nothing out of place. The sound grew louder, deeper, and with a thunderous explosion, the sections of throne room ceiling directly above him, and Mara suddenly collapsed in a downpour of gravel-sized rocks. Look out, Luke shouted, throwing his arms up to protect his head and trying to leap out of the way, but the centre of the rockfall moved with him. He tried again, this time nearly losing his balance as his foot caught in a pile of stones already ankle-deep, too numerous and too small for him to get a grip on through the force. They kept coming, pummeling against him with bruising impact. Through the dust swirling around him, he saw Mara floundering under a deluge of her own, trying to guard her head with one arm as she slashed vainly at the falling stones of her lightsaber. From across the throne room, Luke could hear Han shouting something and guessed that they too were under the same attack. And standing untouched by the destructive rock storms he had unleashed, Sabaoth lifted his hands high. I am the Jedi Master Sabaoth, he shouted, his voice ringing through the throne room in the roar of the rock falls. The Empire, the universe, is mine! Luke dropped his lightsaber back into defense position, senses again tingling with danger, but once again the knowledge did him little good. Sabaoth's lightning burst flashed against a lightsaber blade, the impact knocking Luke off balance and dropping him painfully onto his knees in the pile of stones around him. Even as he struggled to get up, one of the falling rocks slammed hard into the side of his head. He staggered, toppling sideways onto one hand. Again the lightning flashed, throwing coronal fire all through the stone pile and sending wave after wave of agony through him. The lightsaber was plucked from his fingers. Dimly he saw it fly over the railing toward the far end of the throne room. Stop it! Mara screamed. Through the haze of pain, Luke saw that she was standing up to her knees in stones, her lightsaber slashing uselessly through the mound as if trying to sweep them away. If you're going to kill us, just do it. Patience, my future apprentice, Sabaoth said, and squinting through the stones and dust, Luke saw the other's dreamy smile. You cannot die yet, not until I have taken you down to the Grand Admiral's cloning chamber. Beneath her rockfall, Mara jerked, her sense flashing with sudden horror. What? For I have foreseen that Mara Jade will kneel before me, Sabaoth reminded her. One Mara Jade, or another. That's it, Lando said, tapping the activation switch on the last charge. Give it a kick and let's get out of here. From around the central column, Chewbacca growled acknowledgement. Picking up his blaster, Lando stood up, giving each of the doors around the outer walkway a quick look. So far, so good. If they could keep the stormtroopers out for just 2 more minutes, long enough for Chewbacca and him to get off this work platform and out to the walkway. Chewbacca rumbled a warning. Listening closely, Lando could hear the faint rising pitch hum of an extremely unhappy negative flow coupler. Great, Chewie, he said. Let's go. He stepped out onto the end of the bridge, and straight ahead of him the door opposite the bridge blew up. Watch it, Lando barked, dropping flat on his stomach on the bridge, and pouring blaster fire into the cloud of dust and debris expanding out from where the door had been. Already the sizzling blue ripples of stun fire were starting to erupt from the doorway in their general direction. Behind him the roar of Chewbacca's bowcaster was answering. So much for those last 2 minutes. With his face pressed as close to the metal mesh floor as he could get it, Lando found himself looking at the bridge and the thin but sturdy guardrails running along both sides of it. It was crazy, but that didn't mean it wouldn't work. Chewie, get over here, he called, rolling halfway over and throwing a quick look up at the bridge control setting to the top of the work platform guardrail. Extension control. There. Retraction control. Emergency stop control. The bridge shook as Chewbacca landed with a thud on the bridge beside him. Keep them busy, Lando told him. Gauging the distance, he lunged upward, jabbing the retraction control and the emergency stop in quick succession. The bridge lurched out from the work platform and stopped, just far enough for its locking bars to disengage. Chewbacca rumbled a question as the bridge bobbed gently with the strain of their weight. "You'll see," Lando told him. From both sides came flashes of light as 2 more doors disintegrated. "Just hang on to the guardrail supports and keep firing. Here we go." Getting a firm grip himself, he aimed carefully and opened fire, but not at the stormtroopers now charging out onto the circular walkway. His shots were directed instead at the far end of the bridge, flowing out clouds of sparks as they vaporized sections of the mesh flooring and dug chunks out of the structural support bars beneath. The bridge lurched, bobbing even harder now as Lando continued to hammer away at its structural integrity. Beside him, Chewbacca rumbled a savage Wookiee phrase that Lando had never heard him use before. With a horrible shriek of strained metal, the bridge suddenly gave way. Connected to the walkway only by the still intact guardrails, it pivoted ponderously downward. Lando gripped the guardrail tightly as their horizontal position changed rapidly toward a vertical one. And with a crash that nearly jarred him loose, the bridge slammed up against the guardrail of the cloning balcony 3 levels down. "This is our stop," Lando said. "Come on." Jamming his blaster awkwardly into its holster, he swung himself around the steeply angled bridge guardrail to jump onto the cloning balcony floor. Chewbacca, with his natural arboreal skills, was there a good 3 seconds ahead of him. They were halfway to the balcony's exit door, dodging between the rows of Sparty cylinders, when the column behind them blew up. The charges went first, blowing sections of cable and pipework in a series of dazzling fireballs all around the column's perimeter. An evil-looking cloud of smoke and dust and flash-vaporized nutrient liquid swirled into the air, obscuring the view. From all sides, multicolored fluids began spraying out. The work platform they'd been standing on a minute earlier broke free of its supports and slid roughly down the column, tearing and damaging more equipment as it fell. From inside the cloud came a sputtering of shorted power lines and secondary explosions, each one adding to the rain of debris. And with a horrible creaking of strained and shattered supports, the external layers of the column began to peel away and fell almost leisurely outward. Over the din, Chewbacca roared a warning. "Me neither," Lando shouted back. "Let's get out of here." 10 seconds later, bursting past a single token guard had been left on this level's exit door, they were out. They were 2 corridors away when they felt the distant vibration as the column crashed to the cloning cavern floor. "Okay," Lando panted, pausing and glancing both ways as they reached across corridor. R2 must have done a good job of those troop reassignments. The whole area seemed deserted. "Exits that direction," he told Chewbacca, pulling out his comlink. "We'll call the others and get out of here." He keyed for Han, and jerked back as the comlink erupted with a loud crackling noise. "Han?" he called. "Lando?" Han's voice came back, almost inaudible over the noise. "Right," Lando confirmed. "What's happening up there?" "This crazy Jedi's dropping the roof in on us," Han shouted. "Leia and me have a little cover, but he's got Luke and Mara out in the open." "Where are you?" "Down near the cloning cavern," Lando gritted. If that arrhythmic resonance thing of Chewbacca's worked, one of the mountain's reactors would already be starting to flicker with instabilities. If they didn't get out of the mountain before it blew. "You want us to come up and help?" "Don't bother," Card's voice cut in grimly. "There's already a large pile of stone in front of the turbo lift. Looks like we're here for the duration." Chewbacca snarled, his voice filled with frustration. "Forget it, Chewie, there's nothing you could do anyway," Han told him. "We've still got Luke and Mara. Maybe they can stop him." "What if they can't?" Lando demanded, stomach twisting inside him. "Look, you haven't got much time. We think you've got an arrhythmic resonance going on the power core." "Good," Han said. "Means the Bayoff won't get out either." "Han, go on, get out of here," Han cut him off. "Chewie, it's been great, but if we don't make it, someone beside Winter's going to have to take care of Jason and Jaina. You got that?" "The wild card's waiting where you came in," Card added. "They'll be expecting you." "Right," Lando said, gritting his teeth. "Good luck." He keyed off and jammed the comlink back in his belt. Han was right. There wasn't anything they could do against Sabao from down here. But with the wild card's turbo lasers and R2's set of floor plans, "Come on, Chewie," he said, turning toward their exit and breaking into a run. "It's not over yet." "Perhaps it is for the best," Sabaoth murmured, gazing at Luke sadly as he stepped toward him. Blinking the dust away from his eyes, Luke looked up at the old Jedi, trying to force back the agony still throbbing through him. The agony and the looming sense of defeat. Kneeling on the floor, encased in stones to above his waist, with more steel falling on him, facing an insane Jedi Master who wanted to kill him. No. A Jedi must act when he is calm, at peace with the Force. "Master Sabaoth, listen to me," he said. "You're not well. I know that. But I can help you." A dozen expressions flicked across Sabaoth's face, as if he were trying various emotions on for size. "Can you now?" he said, settling on wry amusement. "And why should you do that for me?" "Because you need it," Luke said. "Because we need you. You have a vast store of experience and power that you could use for the good of the New Republic." Sabaoth snorted. "The Jedi Master Jorus Sabaoth does not serve lesser peoples, Jedi Skywalker." "Why not? All the great Jedi Masters of the Old Republic did." "And that was their failing," Sabaoth said, jabbing a finger at Luke. "That was why the lesser peoples rose up and killed them." "But they didn't." "Enough!" Sabaoth thundered. "It doesn't matter what you think the lesser peoples need from me. I am the one who will decide that. They will accept my rule or they will die." His eyes flashed. "You had that choice, Jedi Skywalker. And more, you could have ruled beside me. Instead, you chose death." A drop of sweat or blood trickled down the side of Luke's face. "What about Mara?" Sabaoth shook his head. Mara Jade is no longer any concern of yours, he said. I will deal with her later. No, Mara snapped. You'll deal with me now. Luke looked over at her. The stones were still raining down above her head, but to his astonishment, the knee-high pile of rocks that had been trapping her in place was gone. Now he saw why. Those lightsaber slashes she'd been making earlier hadn't been the useless sweeping motions that she'd assumed. Instead, she'd been slicing huge gashes in the floor, releasing the stones to drain through to the monitor area below. Raising her lightsaber, she charged. Sabaoth swung around to face her, his face contorted with rage. No! He screamed, and again the blue-white lightning crackled from his fingertips. Mara caught the burst on her lightsaber, her mad rush faltering as coronal fire burned all around her. Sabaoth fired again and again, backing toward the throne and the solid wall behind it. Doggedly, Mara kept coming. Abruptly, the rockfall over her head ceased. From the edge of the pile that had half-buried Luke, stones began flying towards Sabaoth. Curving around behind him, they shot straight into Mara's face. She staggered backward, squeezing her eyes shut against the hailstorm and throwing up her right elbow to try to block them away. Setting his teeth, Luke tried to heave away the stones weighing him down. He couldn't leave Mara to fight alone, but it was no use. His muscles were still too weakened from Sabaoth's last attack. He tried again anyway, ignoring the fresh pain the effort sent through him. He looked at Mara and saw her face suddenly change. He frowned, and then he heard it too. Leia's voice, speaking in his mind. Keep your eyes closed, Mara, and listen to my voice. I can see. I'll guide you. No! Sabaoth screamed again. No! She is mine! Luke looked over at the other end of the throne room, wondering how Sabaoth would lash out at Leia in retaliation, but there was nothing. Even the stones had stopped falling on the section of catwalk they were all huddled beneath. Perhaps the long battle had finally begun to drain Sabaoth's strength, and he could no longer risk splitting his attention. Beyond the catwalk, lying half buried in the pile of stone but now blocked the turbolift door, Luke spotted the metallic glint of his lightsaber. If he could call it to him and regain enough strength to join Mara's battle. And then another motion caught his eye. Tied to the catwalk to one side, untouched by the rockfall that had attacked their owner, Card's pet Vaughnskis were tugging at their leashes, straining toward Mara and toward Sabaoth. A wild Vaughnskid nearly killed Mara during their trek through the Mirka forest. It seemed only fitting somehow for these two to help save her. The lightsaber stirred under Luke's call, igniting as his mind found the control. It rolled off the rock pile, the brilliant green blade throwing sparks from the stones as it bounced across them. Luke strained, and the weapon lifted into the air and flew toward him. And as it reached the ruined catwalk, he let the blade dip to slice neatly through the Vaughnskis' leashes. Sabaoth saw them coming, of course. His back nearly to the throne room wall now, he shifted his aim, sending a burst of lightning toward the charging predators as they came up over the stairway. One of them howled and fell to the floor, skidding across the scattered stones. The other staggered but kept coming. The distraction was all the opening Mara needed. She leaped forward against the rock, still pummeling against her face, covering the last remaining distance between her and Sabaoth, and as he brought his hands desperately back toward her, she dropped onto her knees in front of him and stabbed viciously upward with her lightsaber. With a last mournful scream, Sabaoth crumpled, and as it had with the Emperor aboard the Death Star, the dark side energy within him burst out in a violent explosion of blue fire. Luke was ready. Throwing every last bit of strength into the effort, he caught Mara in a solid force grip, pulling her back away from that burst of energy as fast as he could. He felt the wave front slam into him, felt the slight easing of stress as Leia's strength joined his effort. And then suddenly, it was all over. For a long minute, he lay still, gasping for air, fighting against the unconscious threatening to roll over him. Dimly, he felt the stones being pushed away from around him. Are you all right, Luke? Leia asked. He forced open his eyes. Dust-covered and bruised, she didn't look much better than he felt. I'm fine, he told her, pushing against the remaining stones and getting his feet under him. How about the others? They're not too bad, she said, catching his arm to help steady him. But Han's going to need medical treatment. He's got some bad burns. So does Mara, Card said grimly, coming up to the steps holding an unconscious Mara in his arms. We have to get her to the wild card as quickly as possible, so give them a call, Han said. He was kneeling over the dead Luke clone, gazing down at him. Tell them to come pick us up. Pick us up where? Card frowned. Han pointed toward the spot where Sabaoth had died. Right there. Luke turned and looked. The massive detonation of dark-side energy had made a shambles of that end of the throne room. The walls and ceiling were blackened and cratered. The metal of the floor where Sabaoth had stood was buckled and half-melted. The throne itself had been ripped away and was lying smouldering a metre from its base. And behind it, through a jagged crack in the rear wall, he could see the bright twinkle of a single star. Right, Luke said, taking a deep breath. Leia, I see it, she nodded, handing him his lightsaber and igniting hers. Let's get busy. The two rebel assault frigates broke to either side of the beleaguered Golan II, delivering massive broadsides as they veered off. A section of the battle station flared and went dark, and against its darkened bulk another wave of rebel starfighters could be seen slipping past into the shipyards beyond. And Playon was no longer smiling. Don't panic, Captain, Thrawn said, but he too was starting to sound grim. We're not defeated yet. Not by a long shot. Playon's board pinged. He looked at it. Sir, we have a priority message coming in from Wayland, he told Thrawn, his stomach twisting with a sudden horrible premonition. Wayland, the cloning facility. Read it, Captain, Thrawn said, his voice deadly quiet. Decrypt is coming in now, sir, Playon said, tapping the board impatiently as the message slowly began to come up. It was exactly as he'd feared. The mountain is under attack, sir, he told Thrawn. 2 different forces of natives, plus some rebel saboteurs. He broke off, frowning in disbelief. And a group of Nograi. He never got to read any more of the report. Abruptly, a grey-skinned hand slashed out of nowhere, catching him across the throat. He gagged, falling limply in his chair, his whole body instantly paralyzed. For the treachery of the Empire against the Nograi people, Rook's voice said quietly from beside him as he gasped for breath. We were betrayed. We have been revenged. There was a whisper of movement and he was gone. Still gasping, struggling against the inertia of his stunned muscles, Playon fought to get a hand up to his command board. With one final effort he made it, trying twice before he was able to hit the emergency alert. And as the wailing of the alarm cut through the noise of a Star Destroyer at battle, he finally managed to turn his head. Thrawn was sitting upright in his chair, his face strangely calm. In the middle of his chest, a dark red stain was spreading across the spotless white of his Grand Admiral's uniform. Glittering in the center of the stain was the tip of Rook's assassin knife. Thrawn caught his eye, and to Playon's astonishment, the Grand Admiral smiled. But, he whispered, it was so artistically done. The smile faded, the glow in his eyes did likewise, and Thrawn, the last Grand Admiral, was gone. Captain Playon, the comm officer called urgently as the medic team arrived. Too late, to the Grand Admiral's chair. The Nemesis and Stormhawk are requesting orders. What shall I tell them? Playon looked up at the viewports, at the chaos that had erupted behind the defences of the supposedly secure shipyards, at the unexpected need to split his forces to its defence, at the rebel fleet taking full advantage of the diversion. In the blink of an eye, the universe had suddenly turned against them. Thrawn could still have pulled an Imperial victory out of it, but he, Playon, was not Thrawn. Signal to all ships, he rasped. The words ached in his throat, in a way that had nothing to do with the throbbing pain of Rook's treacherous attack. Prepare to retreat. The sun had set beneath a thin layer of western clouds, and the colours of the evening sky were beginning to fade into the encroaching darkness of Coruscant night. Leaning on the chest-high wrought stone railing at the edge of the palace roof, listening to the breezes whispering by her ears, Mara gazed out at the lights and vehicles of the Imperial city below. Buzzing with activity, there was still something strangely peaceful about it. Maybe the peace was in her. Either way, it made for a nice change. 20 meters behind her, the door out onto the roof opened. She stretched out with the force, but she knew who it had to be, and she was right. Mara? Luke called softly. Over here, she called back, grimacing out at the city below. From his sense she could tell he was here for her answer. So much for inner peace. Quite a view, isn't it? Luke commented, coming up beside her and gazing out over the city. Does bring back memories for you. She threw him a patient look. Translation. How am I feeling about the homecoming this time? You know, Skywalker, just between us, you're pretty pathetic when you try to be devious. If I were you, I'd give it up and just stick with that straight-out farm boy honesty. Sorry, he said. Too much time spent around Han, I guess. And Card and me, I suppose? Want a straight-out farm boy honest answer to that? She threw him a crooked smile. I'm sorry I even brought it up. Luke smiled back, then turned serious again. So how are you feeling? Mara looked back out at the lights. Strange, she told him. It's sort of like coming home. Only it isn't. I've never really stood here and just looked at the city like this. The only times I was ever up here were to watch for a certain airspeeder to arrive or to keep an eye on some particular building or something like that. Business for the Emperor. I don't think he ever saw the Imperial City as people and lights. To him it was just power and opportunities. Probably how he saw everything, Luke agreed. And speaking about opportunities, Mara grimaced. She'd been right. He was here for her answer. The whole thing's ridiculous, she said. You know it and I know it. Card doesn't think so. Card's even a worse idealist than you are sometimes. She shot back. In the first place, he's never going to be able to hold this smuggler coalition of his together. Maybe not, Luke said, but think of the possibilities if he can. There are a lot of contacts and information sources out there in the fringe where the New Republic doesn't have any access to at all. So what do you need information sources for? Mara countered. Braun's dead, his cloning center is a shambles, and the Empire's in retreat again. You've won. We won at Endor too, Luke pointed out. That didn't stop us from years of so-called mopping up action. There's still a lot of work yet to be done. It still doesn't make any sense to put me in the middle of it, Mara argued. If you want a liaison between you and the smugglers, why didn't you get Card to do it? Because Card's a smuggler. You were just a smuggler's assistant. She snorted. Big difference. To some people it is, Luke said. This whole negotiation process is running as much on appearance and image as it is on reality. Anyway, Card's already said he won't do it. Now that those Vornskis of his have recovered, he wants to get back out to his people. Mara shook her head. I'm not a politician, she insisted. Not a diplomat either. But you're someone both sides are willing to trust, Luke said. That's what's important here. Mara made a face. You don't know these people, Skywalker. Trust me, Chewbacca and the guys you're sending out to transplant the Noghri to their new world are going to have a lot more fun. He touched her hand. You can do it, Mara. I know you can. She sighed. I have to think about it. That's all right, he said. Just come on downstairs whenever you're ready. Sure. She threw a sideways look at him. Was there something else? He smiled. You're getting good at that. Your fault for teaching me too well. Come on, what is it? Just this. Reaching into his tunic, he pulled out a lightsaber. What's this? Mara asked, frowning. It's my old lightsaber, Luke told her quietly. The one I lost at Cloud City and nearly got killed with at Wayland. He held it out. I'd like you to have it. She looked up at him, startled. Me? Why? He shrugged self-consciously. Lots of reasons. Because you earned it. Because you're on your way to becoming a Jedi and you'll need it. Mostly, though, because I want you to have it. Slowly, almost reluctantly, she took the weapon. Thank you. You're welcome. He touched her hand again. I'll be in the conference room with the others. Come on down when you've decided. He turned and walked away across the palace roof. Mara turned to gaze out at the lights of the city again, the cool metal of the lightsaber pressed against her hand. Luke's lightsaber, probably one of his last links to the past, and he was giving it away. Was there a message in that for her? Probably. Like she'd said, subtlety wasn't one of Luke's strong points. If that was why he'd done it, he'd been wasting his time. Her last link of the past had been broken in the Mount Tantus throne room. Her past was over. It was time to get on with the future, and the New Republic was that future, whether she liked it or not. Behind her, she heard Luke open the roof door. Hang on a minute, she called after him. I'll come with you.